undoing these changes and recreating the original appearance of the property, but the plan was not adopted. See Chapter 8, which we will in a bit. Another change to the property occurred sometime after 1952, when the association acquired about 2 acres southwest of Sagamore Hill. The RMA had planned to allow visitors to walk through the rooms of the house, but it accepted a Park Service committee suggestion for a self-guided tour without access into the rooms. The National Park Service would later replace the self-guided tour with groups tours led by rangers. The RMA planned to name Jessica Kraft, hired by Edith Roosevelt as her secretary in 1945, as the superintendent of the new historic shrine. The Park Service consultants called Kraft a very intelligent lady, willing to learn and very loyal to the family, but they urged that she be made curator instead of superintendent because she had no experience in operating historic houses, and a man would be better able to meet all the problems that will arise. The Park Service advisors recommended that the new access road be located south of the house because a roadway to the north would be visible from the piazza. Nonetheless, Nassau County produced a survey for a road that curved around the northwest side of the building. On March 23, 1953, Nassau officials approved the route and designated it as a county road to be maintained by the county. The county attorney was authorized to acquire or condemn any land needed. And in May, Nassau took title to 8 parcels as well as easements to 8 other properties. A construction contract was awarded in July, making the villagers' 4 years of opposition moot. The next hurdle for the RMA was dealing with decades of deferred maintenance. Edith Roosevelt had not put much money into the house in her final years. The exterior woodwork had shed paint, many of the original shingles had disappeared, and those that remained were cracked and curled. Inside, a leaky roof and old plumbing had left the wallpaper sagging and stained. To deal with these problems, the RMA hired Chapman, Evans, and Delahanty as architectural advisor, and the E.W. Howell Company as a contractor in April 1950. It borrowed $25,000 to begin the most essential repairs, such as new gutters and replacing rotted wood. In the following 2 years, a foundation grant, fundraising, and gains in the association's investment portfolio paid for the new plumbing, heating, and wiring, refinishing or replacing doors, replacing floors, and new ceilings, exterior walls, and an asphalt shingle roof. The architectural consultant recommended that before the house be opened to the public, it needed an adequate water supply for fire protection and a fire alarm, plasterwork, floor and wainscot repairs, and improvements to the back stairs to the 2nd and 3rd floor. In May, the RMA agreed to do the work. To accommodate the public, the stairs to the basement were relocated and the staircase to the 2nd floor widened. New stairs from the 2nd to 3rd floor were built in the western front part of the house. Additional bathrooms were installed on a first floor closet and 2 in the basement. The laundry room was converted to an office for the curator. 4 rooms on the 3rd floor were altered to display exhibits, and 2 became storage space, leaving only the gun room unchanged. Public restrooms were also installed in the ice house. In 1956, a souvenir shop, snack bar, and restroom facility were built by the parking lot. The bathrooms in the ice house were closed but not removed until a major restoration of the house in 2015. The RMA formed a furnishings committee headed by Bertha Rose to redecorate the house. A Roosevelt family friend, Rose was one of the few experts in historic house interiors in the 1940s, having worked on projects with the Winter Thur Museum in Delaware and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan. Her group worked from photographs and the recollections of Ethel, Archie, and Alice, although it sometimes substituted its own judgment for historical accuracy. The current concept of historic preservation had not been developed yet. The thinking on old houses was to present them as high style as possible, rather than recreating historically accurate spaces. The committee managed to furnish almost all the 1st floor and much of the 2nd floor with original furniture and accessories. Artifacts that had been distributed to family, friends, and others over the years began to come back for display. For example, when TR's valet, James Amos, died in 1953, his will included bequests to the Theodore Roosevelt Association, a later incarnation of the RMA, of items the colonel had given him, including an elephant's foot, a hoof of a rhinoceros with a silver inkwell set in it, and a Winchester rifle. Sagamore Hill opened on June 14th, 1953, with President Dwight David Eisenhower, former President Herbert Clark Hoover, and Governor Thomas E. Dewey on hand to dedicate the house as a shrine. The New York Times reported on the front page that about 10,000 people attended. There to greet the dignitaries were Alice, Archie, and Ethel, Ted and Kermit's wives, and other relatives, including half a dozen great-grandchildren. Ethel showed the president through the house. In his speech, Eisenhower noted there was a tendency to think of TR as the charging Rough Rider, but this was a misconception. We like to think in his relationships with Congress that he galloped down Pennsylvania Avenue on a spirited charger with his saber drawn, rushed into the Senate or the House, demanded what he wanted, and rode out with everybody cowed. But the fact is, he was a wise leader. He wasn't a swashbuckler, and he was not a bull in a china shop. He was a great leader and a great student and a great writer. He was a man who understood his fellow human beings. The initial visitors had access to the first floor, the 4 exhibit rooms on the third floor, and a small souvenir shop that occupied Alice's bedroom on the second floor. The RMA, which changed its name to the Theodore Roosevelt Association, or the TRA, in 1953, reported healthy attendance at the House Museum. Kraft told a local weekly newspaper in October that almost 50,000 individual visitors had crossed the threshold and paid the $50 admission, and at least that many children had come with school or scout groups. Kraft said completion of the new access road would boost the numbers. Even with the high visitation, the TRA was incurring a deficit managing the property and began looking for savings, particularly in personal costs. On August 15th, 1956, Kraft reported the 200,000th paid visitor was admitted. It was Kate Strong of Setauket, Long Island, a great admirer of Mr. Roosevelt, who was presented with a copy of the book Roosevelt the Industrialist. On a less upbeat note, the curator noted that a small revolver and hunting knife were missing from the gunroom and a spoon from the kitchen. Also that year, Alice's bedroom and the boys' northeast bedroom were refurbished and opened to the public, with the original back porch, while the original back porch was enclosed to provide a staff kitchen. Alice donated furniture and a rug for her former bedroom, while Ethel provided a dresser, pincushion, figurine, and linen. The cost of operating Sagamore Hill continued to trouble the TRA. The association, which had emerged with the Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association in 1953, had been spending a lot of money in Cove Neck and elsewhere. The group's budget for 1961 showed that the purchase and restoration of the Cove Neck site had been budgeted at $400,000. Purchasing the Manhattan property and rebuilding Theodore Roosevelt birthplace was budgeted at $540,000. The cost of the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Park in Oyster Bay was $700,000. The gift of Theodore Roosevelt Island in Washington, D.C. to the nation at a preliminary expense of $475,000, and the donation of Roosevelt letters and other items to the Harvard College Library was valued at $300,000. So, let's see, 400, 940, 1640, 21. That's $2,435,000 total. To prevent depletion of its assets, the organization began to pursue a transfer of Sagamore Hill and the birthplace to the National Park Service. Secretary of the Interior Stuart L. Udall inspected the house on May 25, 1963, and said, It would be a very fine addition to the national park system, the New York Times reported. Udall added that he did not know of any other national historic site with the particular flavor and feeling of this place. You almost feel as if Teddy Roosevelt was going to stride in the door. The article noted that Sagamore Hill had been visited by more than 500,000 adults and hundreds of thousands of schoolchildren in the previous 8 years. While negotiating with federal officials and members of Congress, on August 1st, 1961, the TRA sold the northern 11 acres of the 15 acres known as Smith's Field, jutting north from the western end of the property. The portion sold included the nest and Edith Roosevelt's getaway spot. The sale left the association with 72 acres. Shortly before donating Sagamore Hill to the National Park Service in 1963, the TRA brought 2 lots totaling 4 acres around Old Orchard from the estate of Ted III's widow, Eleanor, who had died in 1960. This was the same land that Edith Roosevelt had given to her son. The purchase brought the size of the property offered to the federal government to approximately 78 acres. The TRA's intent was to donate the Cove Neck and Manhattan properties along with a $500,000 endowment. Legislation to make that possible was included in Congress. 5 congressmen on the committees considering the bill came to the House in February 1962 and were given a tour by Ethel Roosevelt Darby. In the drawing room, one newspaper account related, TR's younger daughter said, "My mother didn't like big game hunting and animals and that sort of thing, and she kept them out of this room. She did like Admiral Peary, though, and what he'd done, so she didn't object to his polar bear. He caught it." On April 2nd, 1962, the House of Representatives unanimously passed the bill to establish Sagamore Hill and the Theodore Roosevelt birthplace as National Historic Sites. Senate approval followed on July 18th, and the legislation was sent to President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. On July 22nd, TRA Board President Oscar Straus mailed Ethel a one-sentence message. The president signed the bill last night. He wrote to Archie and Alice the same day to say, "This development makes secure the continued existence of these 2 memorials to your father, in perpetuity." The Park Service offered jobs to the TRA's 6 employees at Sagamore Hill, with Kraft continuing as curator. Udall, after trying unsuccessfully to get JFK to